Hello, God bless you, and welcome to episode 35 of Unshackled Life Q&A. My name is Dalen Woodard, and I'm a Bible teacher and assistant pastor at Nacogdoches Christian Fellowship and founder of Unshackled Life Ministries in Nacogdoches, Texas. These Q&As cover questions about God, the Bible, and theology, and we'll examine the questions from a biblical perspective and using biblical thinking, meaning approaching the question from a biblical worldview and using the text in context with the passage where it is found, as well as keeping it in context and agreement with the entirety of Scripture. At the end of the Q&A, I will give you ways to ask your own questions for future episodes. Also, I'd like to thank the person who asked the question we'll be covering today. So let's get to it. Question: why keep an evil treaty? If someone breaks a contract or enters into it fraudulently, the violated party is released from the contract. God agrees this is right. He made promises to Israel that were null and void, or at least put on hold, if the Israelites didn't do their part or keep up their end. Divorce is biblically allowed in cases of adultery and sexual immorality because someone broke the covenant and contract of marriage. In light of all that, why did the Israelites have to keep the treaty with the Gibeonites in Joshua 9 when it was revealed that the information they based their agreement on wasn't true? Since the Gibeonites didn't tell the truth about their qualifications to be entered into a treaty with, why should the Israelites keep their word and not attack the Gibeonites, especially when they knew the agreement was outside the command of God's will? He had specifically told them not to make treaties with these people. Joshua 9 is a short chapter, so let's take a quick read through it before we address the question. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland along the coast of the Great Sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning, and went and made ready provisions, and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us." But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" They said to him, "From a very distant country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon the king of Heshbon, and to Og king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, We are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you, but now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey.' So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, and made a covenant with them, to let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore to them. At the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors, and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out, and reached their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath-Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when you dwell among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it." So he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord to this day in the place that he should choose. Now we have the whole story. The question is understandable. The Gibeonites were Hivites, a part of the group of people Israel were specifically told not to enter into covenant with. They were afraid of being driven out or killed, and so they conned their way into a treaty. So why keep the treaty when it was with an enemy of God, and they lied to get the agreement anyway? The simple answer is given to us in the text, in verses 18 through 21. But the people of Israel did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders, but all the leaders said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. Also, they were very familiar with Numbers 30:1 and 2. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the people of Israel, saying, "This is what the Lord has commanded. If a man vows a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." They kept their word because they had sworn by God to do so. That's the simple answer. But it doesn't really satisfy the question of why they weren't released from their oath by God since the Gibeonites entered into it falsely. I believe the logic behind the question would work had something a little different taken place. Notice that Joshua and the leaders of Israel asked the Gibeonites where they were from to try to make sure it was okay to enter into a covenant with them. Also notice what they didn't do. They didn't ask God. They didn't pray about it or seek his guidance. Joshua was basically the head of a group known as the leaders of Israel, but he and the others were the led leading the led. The true leader of Israel was God, which is why their later asking for a human king was a rejection of God. They acted on their own initiative and in their own understanding and desires. Since divorce was brought up, let's examine a hypothetical. What if you, as a single believer with a love for God and a full intention of obedience to him, meet someone? This person says, "I'm a Christian too," and you already felt attracted and connected with their looks, personality, hobbies, whatever, and now you have this same yoke freedom. You rejoice and get married, but at no point did you pray about it and seek God about if this was the right person for you. You also got married quickly without getting to know the person as well as you should have. Then, sometime soon after the wedding, you find out they lied about being a Christian because they wanted you to like them. Now what do? We are clearly instructed not to be unequally yoked in marriage with unbelievers. Well, what you don't do, or don't get to do biblically, is immediately divorce and kick the liar to the curb. You entered into a covenant before God with this person. You pray and ask for forgiveness and grace. You've sinned, and committing another sin to fix it is never the answer. If you're a guy, you commit again to laying your life down for this woman, and you forgive her deceit. You love her with all the grace God has given so that you keep your part of the vow, and perhaps by your faithfulness to God and love for her, lead her to the Lord. If you're a woman, you submit to his leadership unless it contradicts God's leadership and love him and God faithfully. You forgive his deceit, and yes, also, so that your faithfulness to God and love for him might drive him to Jesus. That doesn't mean that there won't be issues and conflict and spiritual hindrances in the family as a consequence of you acting as Lord of your own life instead of looking to your Lord for direction before you moved. There's some grace here for the Gibeonites as well. When Israel first left Egypt, all these nations were afraid. But Israel's disobedience and unfaithfulness led to a 40-year delay and a military defeat that bolstered the enemy's confidence. They were now ready to fight rather than flee before the invading chosen children of God. But not the Gibeonites. They didn't want God as an enemy. They were still afraid. They didn't want to flee, and they didn't want to fight. They may have done it deceitfully, but they drew near to God's people the only way they could see as possible. Some of these very people's descendants became assimilated into Israel and even helped rebuild the temple. God has always made himself available to those who would draw near to him. They weren't accepted for trying to sneak in. They became servants and lived in bondage. But it was bondage in proximity to the truth that allowed at least some of them to eventually become a part of God's people rightly and worship him in truth according to the ways he established for strangers and aliens, non-Jews, to worship and be a part of his people and live by faith in him. That grace to forbear coming wrong gives me great joy. It isn't as smooth and painless a transition as coming rightly, but it'll get you there eventually. Seek him, and you will find him, even if, in your fear, brokenness, or ignorance, you mess up on your way. Finally, to finish my thought on the answer would be different had something different happened, there were two kinds of covenants, conditional and unconditional. If the Israelites had said, as long as we don't find out you lied to us about who you are and where you're from, we'll agree not to war with you. Then, when they found out, they would have been within their rights to wage war and still honor their pledge before God. But not only did they not seek him, they just said, we will not war with you. They entered into an unconditional covenant of peace. Since no conditions were given, they were stuck with keeping their word. Like I said, you don't fix one mistake with another mistake. You don't fix sin by sinning. When we step outside of the will of God because we lead ourselves and make wrong choices without seeking him, we'll have consequences in our life that make things harder at times. But we don't get to pretend it away, violate God's will even further, or disobey again. We trust in God's forgiveness, mercy, grace, and promise to finish what he started in us and just walk from that moment on faithfully. All right, thank you for listening. I hope the answer to today's question helped you in some way. If you have a question about God, the Bible, or theology, you can email your question to DalenWoodard@minister.com. That's DalenWoodard@minister.com. Or go to the Unshackled Life Ministries Facebook page and ask there, or through DM. Find me, Dalen Woodard, on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, and ask there, or reply to this video on YouTube. May the Lord bless you and keep you and give you an ever-deepening hunger for his word. Help us spread the word by sharing, commenting, and clicking that like button. Stay up to date on the Q&As by subscribing to this channel. And remember, when you fix your thoughts on God and build your thinking on the foundation of His truth, God fixes your thoughts.